Bezras Hashem. Hello. Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I get the event.
I get no.
Okay, Hantik Daf is Daf Chof Aleph. Today's Daf is Daf Chof Aleph. Bezras Hashem, we're beginning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 lines from the top. The Mishnah discussed that the mitzvah of Megillas Esther is the kosher. You could read the Megillas Esther throughout the day. It's a mitzvah that has to be done during the day of Purim, but you have a whole day to do it. And then the Mishnah ended off and said, Zaklal, let me give you a rule. Dava shemitzvah sebayom, any mitzvah that you have to do during the daytime. For example, let's say bris milah. So it has to be during the daytime. Kosher kol hayom. You kosher the whole day to do it. You don't have to do it right away in the morning. You could actually do it in the afternoon. But the mitzvah always is to do it as soon as possible. That's why people who are scrupulous in mitzvahs will read the Kriya Shema. I don't know what time sunrise is. I think it's like 7:15. They'll read the Kriya Shema the first opportunity, or daven Shemona Esrei first opportunity. But be'emes, anything that your mitzvah is to be done the whole day, it's kosher the whole day. So the Gemara says like this: Zahaklal, this rule la tuyemai. What does it come to include? That's not written in the Mishnah. Zaklal is hinting to a mitzvah that is not written into the Mishnah. So la tuye, it's come to add siddur bezichim v'silik bezichim, taking off the spices, putting on new spices, and taking off the spices off the shulchan Rabbi Yossi. Here's a picture of the shulchan, right? This is the shulchan. In the shulchan, every Shabbos, they changed out the breads. And that's what we're talking about over here. Shabbos morning, according to Rabbi Yossi, you change out the breads. You take the old bread, divide it up to the kahanim. You take the two incense, the bezichem, these two cups over here, and you throw them onto the mizbech. You put it onto the mizbech and you burn it. And that was the mitzvah but you have to put new breads on. You have to put new breads on to the shulchan. You can't leave it and put Sunday morning brand new breads. You have to have new breads come on sometime during the day of Shabbos. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Because he says, although the pasuk says tamid, the shulchan always has to have bread on it, it doesn't mean 24 hours. It means daily. So you could take off the old bread Shabbos morning and put the new bread Shabbos afternoon. But according to the Chachamim, no, every second there has to be bread on the shulchan. So how do they do it? As they push out the old bread, they're pushing in the new bread. That's how they did it. They push out the old bread and then put the new bread in. So that's what the Gemara says. Our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso. Rabbi Yossi oimer silik es yeshana shachris. If you took away the old bread and the old besamim in the morning, v'sidr es chadasha arbis, and you put the new bread at night. Let's say it doesn't mean at night. It means like Shabbos afternoon. Ein b'kach klum. There was no problem with that. And umani mekayim. How do I keep the pasuk lifnei Hashem tamid? It always has to be something on the shulchan. That means it means that the table should not be without bread, but not every second it had to have bread on it. But this is only the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. And Chachamim disagree. Chachamim hold you don't have a whole day to put new bread on. It has to be at the second you take off the old bread, you have to put the new bread at the same time. So this is what this hinted by the Zeh HaKlal. Then the Mishnah said, something the mitzvah is at night. You have entire night to do the whole mitzvah. Again, let's say Kriya Shema. You read the Kriya Shema after dark, so you don't have to do it the first second after dark. You have the whole night to do it. But Chachamim said that you should do it, try to do Kriya Shema before midnight, right? But the Mishnah says if the mitzvah is to be done at nighttime, you have the Kosher Kol Halayla. So the Gemara says, La Tuye Mai. What's that coming to be marba? So La Tuye, this comes to include Achilas Psochim, that including the eating of Korban Pesach. According to Rabbi Akiva told you that Korban Pesach can be eaten the entire night. You didn't have to eat it up to a certain point. Min HaTorah, you can eat it the entire night. Chacham said try to do it before Chatzos, the eating of the Pesachim. But this does not agree and align itself with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. The Tanya we learned in a brisa, v'achlu esabasa b'layla hazeh. You have to eat the meat of the Korban Pesach this night. Omer Rab Elazar ben Azariah says, Nema kan b'layla hazeh. It says over here, b'layla hazeh, right over here, eat the meat at that night. V'nema lahalet. It says by the makas b'choyros, v'varti beretz Mitzrayim. I'll pass through Eretz Mitzrayim, b'layla hazeh on this night. So ma lahalan ad chetzois, avkan ad chetzois. So just like over there, the pasuk v'varti beretz Mitzrayim is talking about midnight. So also eating the basar on that night, you have up until midnight to do it. But this is not the opinion of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says the eating of the meat of the Korban Pesach aligns itself with till the time we were forced out of Mitzrayim, which is Shas Chipazoin, which is by dawn time, where Pari said, get out of Mitzrayim. So therefore, Mishnah that says something that the mitzvah is to be done at night, it's kosher the entire night, is coming to be marbe the Korban Pesach. Hadron Allah Chakoire Lamafreya. With the Hashem's help, we finished the second parak, and now we begin the third parak. The Mishnah begins in the Mishnayos. You actually find that the fourth parak is switched with the third parak, but here in our the way they put it into the Shas, they put this Hakoire is the third parak. Hakoire es Megillah. If you read the Megillah, so the one that reads the Megillah, Oimed v'yoshev. If he wants, he could stand, or if he wants, he could sit. We're not specific about it. Of course, probably lechatchila he should stand, but it's okay if you sit. Then the Mishnah says, which Gemara is going to tell us, this is not like Kriyas HaTorah. Kriyas HaTorah, reading the Torah, the reader has to be standing. We're going to see that in the Gemara. Kara echad, karo shnaim. If one person is the reader of the Megillah, or even two people are reading the Megillah, it's the same thing. Yotza, yotza. You fulfill your obligation. Now, you would think if two people are reading the Megillah at the same time, so you can't, how are you supposed to concentrate? But the answer is that a person, because the mitzvah of Megillah has a certain chavivus to a person, it's beloved, the story is interesting, so therefore a person will pay attention to both of them. So he's technically, let's think about that. I think he's yoitzev because he's hearing it from two people, but he has to hear it from two people. Or you could learn pshat that when he hears it from two people, he's actually focusing on one. So the other person talking doesn't disturb him from focusing in on one of the two people. And what would be the difference? It would be the difference is, suppose one of them is reading from a non-kosher Megillah. So if the reason why you're yoitza is because you're hearing it from two people, then both have to be reading it from a kosher Megillah. But if the reason why you're yoitza when two people are reading is because you could focus in on one of the two people, so if you focus in on the one that's reading from a kosher Megillah, you're yoitza. So it's the machlokes rishonim how to learn this part of the Mishnah. Then the Mishnah says, Mokoim, there were certain places nahagu levarech. The meaning was to make a bracha after the Mikra Megillah. That's Haravitz Rivenu. Yivarech, you should go along. You have permission to make that bracha. Vishaloi levarech. If the meaning is not to make the bracha, lo yivarech, you don't have to make the bracha. But if you want to make the bracha, you could make the bracha, because there's a bracha prior to reading the Megillah. That everybody agrees you have to make the bracha Mikra Megillah. But there's a bracha afterwards, which our meaning is only to say it at nighttime, which is a thank you it's a shvach to Hashem that he took revenge from our enemies, so that some communities did not make the bracha, but if you want, you could make that bracha. Now the Mishnah says, since we're talking about minhagim, the Mishnah talks about b'sheni, on Monday, b'chamishi, on Thursday, b'Shabbos b'mincha, on Shabbos b'mincha, koirin shloisha, you call three people up to the Torah. Moshe and Ezra expanded on it. They made a rule for the Jewish people that they should not go 3 days without hearing the reading of the Torah. So that's why we hear Monday, Thursday, and Friday. And the Shabbos by Mincha, they also made a reading because there were some people that only showed up to shul on Shabbos. And the reason is because they were so busy opening their shops in the morning, they weren't there on Monday and Thursday. So there was an extra reading of the upcoming Parsha on Shabbos Mincha. So the Mishnah says, because they are weekdays and people are working, so we don't want to burden the tzibur. That's very, when the Chazal made rules and established customs, they were concerned about putting overtaxing the tzibur. So the current shloisha, only 3 people are called out to the Torah. Ain paikasim, you can't do less than 3. The ain masifin aleim. Even if somebody has a yard site or anything like that, you don't add more than 3. The ain maftirim benavi, and we don't do haftarah in navi on Monday and Thursday and Shabbos mincha. Haftarah was established by normal kriyas on Shabbos because there was times that there were gezeras that we were not allowed to even listen to the Torah. So they used to have, they established that we should at least listen to Navi because we were ruled by different lords, and therefore they could not read the Torah. So they established that during those times they read the Navi. So even if those gezeros were nullified, but we still have the custom to read Navi, a hafta of Torah of Navi. But we don't do that on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos mincha. The Mishnah says that the person that gets the first aliyah, and the person that has the last aliyah make the brachas. Not like what we do it today. The Mishnah is talking about the kohen probably makes the first bracha. The Yisrael that gets the final aliyah, he makes the final bracha because it's one reading. So all you need is 2 brachas technically for one reading, even though you're calling 3 people up. B'Rosh Chodesh, the Gemara is going to talk about why that minhag changed. B'Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaShemoed, Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaShemoed, where Rosh Chodesh has one more kedusha. Women are not supposed to do malacha work on Rosh Chodesh, but their days permitted for men to work. Chol HaShemoed and Chol HaMoed means that if you're going to lose money, you're allowed to go to work on Chol HaMoed, but nevertheless, it has a different, more kedusha. Karin Abba, they would call 4 people up to the Torah. You don't do less, you don't do more, and you don't do maftir and navi. And then the Mishnah repeats itself. The ones that open, the first reader makes the first bracha, the last reader says the last bracha. They are the ones that makes the bracha first and the afterwards. And this idea is going to be repeated again. And then the Mishnah says, Zaklal, let me give you a rule. Kol sheyesh by Musaf, the ain't a yontif. Let's say you have a situation where there's a Musaf and not a yontif. The only situation that the Mishnah says is Rosh Chodesh. Tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, there's a Musaf, but it's not really yontif. You go to work. Kairin Abba, you call 4 people up to the Torah. B'yamtiv, on yontif, you call Chamisha, 5 people. Because work is asar yontif, quasi work is permitted, you're allowed to cook on yontif. B'yam Kippurim, Shisha. There are 6 people called to the Torah. Although you're not allowed to work and you're not allowed to eat, but if you transgress working or eating, you get the Isser of Karas. But Shabbos, which is the most severe and more holiest, Shiva, you call 7 people up to the Torah. Ein Pechasamem, you don't do less. Avol Moisifin Aleim, but you're allowed to do more. Now here, it seems to imply that even on Yom Kippur, even on Yom Tiv, you're allowed to make Haisafis, they're called. If you want to call 6 people up on Yom Tiv, it would seem permitted. But others learn that no, that this Aval Masifin, I don't know why it's Alehen, because they learn Masifin means Alehen on those 7. So Masifin will only be on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you're allowed to add aliyahs, not on Yom Kippur and not on Yom Tiv, because Shabbos is the most holiest, so there's nothing on top of it. So then you're allowed to add more. Umaftirin benavi, and you do a haftarah navi on Yom Tiv and Yom Kippur and Shabbos. Hapaseach v'achoysim b'Torah, those that open. The first guy, the kohen that gets the first aliyah, he says the first bracha. The person that gets the last aliyah, he says the last bracha. They make the bracha prior and after. Now, why does the Mishnah teach you this idea 3 different times? Because you would think, as you're calling more people up to the Torah, maybe the halacha will change, that maybe everybody should make the first bracha or the second bracha or something like that. So no, they're all one mitzvah of reading, whether you're reading it on Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tiv, or Yom Kippur, Shabbos. Min Hadin, the first one that was called up first, he makes the Baruch Hashem Avarach Hashabacha Banu. Everybody is quiet, they lay. And then by the last aliyah, the last person makes the final bracha, the after bracha of the Torah. Tana, we learned in the Brisa. We began the Mishnah saying that the Megillah can be read with the reader sitting down. Tana, we learned in a brisa, Masha'en came by Torah. Torah is not the same. When you're reading from the Torah, the Torah has to be read standing up, either because it's covered for the Torah, either because the Torah it's covered at Tzibor, that when you're reading the Torah has a special unique halacha that you could only be yotzei the kriyat standing. And not only that, some people say that even listening to the Torah, the minig in some places is still when you're listening to the Torah, you're standing. But it's not a universal custom. How do I know when it comes to reading the Torah you have to stand? God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you stand next to me. When Moshe Rabbeinu was there, so it's so to speak, and he was teaching him the Torah. Basically, what Hashem said, you stay with me, but Amoid means you stand. Imodi, with me, that I'm also standing, so to speak. So that's what Hashem is saying. Rababo is saying, Hashem's the reader, Moshe is the listener. If the pasuk wouldn't write it this way, we wouldn't have permission to say that God stands. What the pasuk is saying, that also HaKadosh Baruch Hu was standing and reading it and teaching it to Moshe. So you see that you're supposed to stand when you're reading the Torah. The honor Rababo extended this. Menayin, how do I know? L'Rav, for a teacher, shelo yeshiv al gabe mita, he shouldn't sit on the bed, which was the recliner. Yashnun la talmidei al gabe karper, and teaches students who are sitting on the ground. That means they're not level with him. In other words, he's above on the stage and they're lower down. That shouldn't be. The students and the teacher have to be on the same ground. Either both of them are standing or both of them are sitting. Shenema, because we see the way Hashem taught Moshe. You stand, I'm standing. So we see from there that you're supposed to be on level. The Rebbe has to be on level with the students. Tana Rabbanan. From the time of Moshe to Rabbi Gamliel, they were not teaching Torah only standing. Torah was taught only standing. When Rabbi Gamliel passed, all of a sudden sickness came to the world and people could not stand. So therefore, they would teach Torah and learn Torah sitting. This aligns itself with this Mishnah. Rabbi Gamliel passed away. Batel kavod Torah. The honor of Torah became a little bit like nullified because they didn't show the honor to the Torah as they did before he passed, because now they're learning sitting down and they're teaching sitting down. Kosev echad oimer. There was one pasuk that says Moshe Rabbeinu says ve'eshev bahar. On the first luchos, Moshe says, I sat on top of the mountain to get the luchos from Hashem. The Kosev echad oimer, and one pasuk says v'noichi amaditi bahar. I stood on the mountain. So either what was Moshe doing by the second luchos? So by the first luchos it says he was sitting on the mountain. On the second luchos he says he's standing on the mountain. So what did Moshe sit when Hashem was teaching, or did he stand? Amar Rav explained, Oimed v'loimed, when he stood, when he was first learning it for the first time, Yoshev v'shayni, he would sit and he would review it. So when he reviewed it by himself the second time, that he sat for. Rab Chanina Amar, Rab Chanina says, Loi oimed v'lo yoshev ela shoicha. He didn't stand or sit, he was bending over. That's how Moshe Rabbeinu accepted the Torah on the mountain. So that's why you resolve the contradiction. He was sitting and standing. It was somewhere in between. He was standing, but very much bent over in humility. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Ein yeshiva ela loshen akava. Yeshiva means you stay. He remained on the mountain. He stayed on the mountain. The Jews settled in Kadesh, in a place called Kadesh, for many days. So do we see that the word teshu doesn't necessarily mean actual sitting? It means you remained in that place. Rava resolves the contradiction of sitting and standing. Rakois me'umaid. If things were easy to understand, like things that flow into you, then me'umaid, he stood. V'kashais, but if it was difficult to understand, Meyushav, Moshe Rabbeinu sat down, because to focus and concentration, he needed to sit down to listen. Okay, I had a Rebbe that stood when he taught Torah, and he only wore his hat. would teach, and it made it such a roshim on me because the teaching was we venerated his teaching because he was standing wearing the hat and he would never sit down. But you have to have koyach to be able to do that. Karo echad, karo shnayim yatsu. We learned in the Mishnah that if two people are reading the Megillah and you hear it from two people, yatsa. We go to Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Mashen Kim b'Torah, that Torah, if two people are the readers of the Torah and you're the listener, you won't be yatsa because Torah is not as interesting. I mean, it's a lot details and halachas and whatever, so it's not chaviva, and it happens often. So therefore, you can't have two people reading the Torah to be yaitze. Tanu Rabbanim, we learned in the Brisa, but Torah, when learning Torah, when reading the Torah in the shul, echad koirei ve'echad metargem. One should be reading the Torah, and only one should be the translator reading the Targum. Targum was a language, Aramaic, that people understood, and this was the translation of what was just read. So one of them had to say the Targum. But ulavad, make sure shloye echad koire. No, you shouldn't have one person reading, uvushnayim metargemin, and two people translating. Of course, you can't have two readers, but you can't have two translators because it was very important for the people who had no, they weren't literate. This was their whole understanding of the Torah, so they had to very much pay attention to the translator as he's translating the Torah in Aramaic so they could understand what to do and how to perform the mitzvahs. And therefore, you can't have even two people translating it. You have to have one reader and one person. After the reader finished a pasuk, the translator would say the pasuk loud to the people. Uva Navi, but when they read Navi in shul, echad koire, one would read the Navi, ushnayim etargim, and two people can targum. You shouldn't have two people reading it and two people translating it. In other words, you could have one reader because you could listen in, only one, but not two. But two people can translate it because even if you don't get the full translation of the prophets, you didn't miss any essential mitzvahs of the Torah because very few mitzvahs are written in the Navi. So therefore, it wasn't as important to have one person being mitargumim. I guess the reason why they needed two people in case is because probably it was large crowds, but only by Navi they permitted to have two translators, not when they read the Chumash. Ubahalo, when they read Halal in the shuls, and then time again, nobody knows how to read anything. So the way they read Halal was, I guess, they would read the Halal out loud, and if you couldn't say the pasuk, you at least listen to the translation. Uba Megillah, of course, reading the Megillah. You could have a filasara kair. You could have 10 people reading the Halal or the Megillah for everybody. Vasara metargamim. I don't know if you needed 10 people translating it, or just you needed to hear the Halal, or you needed to hear the Megillah. You don't need to have the translation. That would be good. My time, what's the reason? How could you hear from 10 different people saying the same thing? Kaven de Chaviva, since it's beloved by people, the story is beloved, and Halal also talks about the redemption of Mitzrayim. Yahavedati, you put your mind to it and you focus. V'shama, you can hear it even if two people are saying the same thing at the same time. Mishnah continued. Makam shenahago levarech. If you're in a place where they make a bracha on the Megillah, you can make the bracha. Amar Abaya said, Lo shanu ela la'achareha. Only after the Megillah, you have a choice. If the minig was to make the bracha, make the bracha. There's some places that did not have the minig. But before the Megillah is read, there's no choice. Mitzvah levarach. There has to be a mitzvah to make a bracha. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Kol ha-mitzvahs kulan. Every mitzvah that you're about to perform, mevarach aleim, you have to make a bracha. Oiver la'asiyasa. Oiver la'asiyasa means prior to you doing it. Now, this word oiver is a little funny word to mean prior. Usually, oiver means after or past that you did it. But he used the expression oiver. We'll see what that means in a second. But the reason why you have to read, you have to make a bracha prior is first of all to put you into the mood of the mitzvah and to have you focus on what the mitzvah is all about, what you're about to perform Hashem's commandment, and also to get so that you get a ruchnius, a spiritual lift from doing the mitzvah. So the word oiver, he said, do it before you do it. My mashma, the high oiver lishn daktumehi. How do you know? Where do you see that the word oiver means prior to? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amar Kra, Bayoretz achimatz der chakikar, Bayavor es hakushi. The pasuk says achimatz, who ran past this kushi, this black messenger, he wanted to get a message over to David HaMelech. Vayavor es hakushi means, if you look at the context of that pasuk, he came prior to the kushi to David HaMelech. So therefore, Vayavor is a word that means he came prior. Abaya Omar V'hocha. V'hu avar lefnechem. He went before him. That's by Yaakov meeting Esav. V'hu avar lefnechem. He passed in front of his family because Yaakov was leading his family in bowing down to Esav. So you see the word avar means prior to. V'yibayisem Vayavar malkum lefnechem v'yashem b'roisham. The king, the Melech HaMashiach, will go before them, but Hashem will be at the head. So that's when it's talking about Mashiach time. So we see in 3 different places that the word oiver means prior to. So when Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, every mitzvah you have to make oiver lesson yosem, it means prior to doing the mitzvah. So you could ask a question: why did he use this fancy Hebrew to write the word oiver lesson? He should write koydem lesson yosem, before you do it. And the answer to that is by using the word oiver implies more. It has to be right at the moment you're doing the mitzvah. You can't say the bracha and then have a delay and then do the mitzvah. It has to be very close nearby. Or the word oiver means a fascinating thing. It means even after you did the mitzvah, you could still make the bracha on the mitzvah. And there's a machlokes that even if, let's say, someone forgot to make a bracha on Bedikas Chametz and he finished the Bedika Chametz, he potentially could still make the bracha al Bedikas Chametz, because oiver means, because it's the bracha on the mitzvah. So you did the mitzvah first with your body, but you still need to say the kedusha words of the point of the mitzvah. So therefore, technically, according to some, you could say it even after doing it. That's the fancy word oiver. Lefanel my mevarach. What bracha do you make before doing the Megillah? Rav Sheshes mekaterazaya ikle lekamid Rav Ashi. Rav Sheshes from this place came to Rav Ashi ubarach, and he makes the bracha menach. Way to remember it is Mikra Megillah, Al Hanisim, Shas Hanisim Lavasenu, and then Shechianu, the first Shechianu. And here you have a machlokes between Ashkenazim and Sfardim. Ashkenazim make a Shechianu by the Megillah daytime and the nighttime and the daytime. I think Sfardim only make them Shechianu at night, but not during the day. Then the Achrei Almay Mevarach. What's the bracha that is optional after the Megillah? So Gemara says, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Harav Es Rivenu, who takes up our quarrels, V'Adon Es Tunenu, he judges our judgments, V'Hanoikem Es Nikmasenu, he takes our revenge, V'Hanifra Lanu Mitzarenu, and pays back those that are trying to oppress us. Va'nifra lanu means he doesn't necessarily get involved. He probably sends somebody else to do it, some other malach to pay a punishment for those that oppressed us. B'hamashalem, but Hashem personally punishes gemul, the return for l'chol oivei nafshenu, those that are enemies against our soul. So when the Rishonim are trying to poison our soul, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets personally involved. Hamashalem. V'hanifra means he gets it done, but not necessarily that Hashem does it himself. He may send the messenger to do it. This, by the way, v'hanifra v'hamshalem, you say in Be'amuna every Marav, so you should know the difference between the two. But oivei nafshenu is worse by Hashem. Baruch Atah Hashem, hanifla Yisrael mikol tzareim. He pays and takes back for the benefit of Yisrael from all their oppressors. Rava says, Hakel HaMashiach. You're supposed to say the Almighty that saves, because that's basically what happened. We got saved from destruction by Haman, and not only that, Hashem helped us revenge those people that were going to kill us. So therefore, you should say both. Baruch Atah Hashem, you end it off, Hanifra Yisrael Mikol Tzareim, who pays back the Jewish on behalf of the Jews from all their oppressors. Hakel, the Almighty, Hamashiach, who saves. One more piece of Gemara. B'Sheni, b'Chamishi, b'Shabbos, Karen Shloishi. So the Gemara says, Hani Shloisha connected me. What's the reason why we have to call 3 people up to the Torah? Amar Abasi connected Torah, Nevi'im, Eksuvim. That corresponds to Torah, Nevi'im, Eksuvim. Rava Amma connected Kahanim, Leviim, Yisraelim. So therefore, the number 3 has reference to when we reading the Torah on those 3 days. But there's another halacha that you have to have 10 psukim. You call 3 people up to the Torah, but between the 3 of them, you have to read minimum 10 psukim. So what does that correspond to? You can't have a kriya of less than 10 psukim. And Vaidaba Oilam in a minyan. And the pasuk Vaidaba Hashem El Moshe Lemer is counted as one pasuk, even though that's a very common pasuk. So Hani Asura connected me. What does these 10 psukim correspond to? Since you're trying to, the numbers are not just numbers taken out of a hat; they correspond to some meaning. So what is the idea that we have to read a minimum of 10 psukim? Amar Rabbi Shua Levi says, "Keneged Asara Batlanish Beis Knesses." There are 10 people that are supposed to be totally dedicated in the shul learning in any shul, and that defines a city. So corresponding to those 10 people, we read 10 pesukim, and always that means that we should always be thinking about there are some people that are not working and that we should support them. Rav Yosef Amma, King Neged Aseres Hadibur Shneim Moshe Sinai. When you're reading the Torah, you have to remind yourself of the Kabbalahs, the acceptance that you did of taking the Aseres Hadiburs that was sent by Moshe by Sinai, and there were 10 commandments. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Keneged Asora Mamoresh Behem Nivra Olam." The reason why we read 10 psukim to remind yourself that the whole world, the whole universe, was created by 10 times God said, "Let this." God made a statement. So, corresponding to those statements, we read at least minimum of 10 psukim to remind ourselves that the whole reason why the universe exists is because that we should be able to follow the precepts of the Torah. Hey Ninu. So the Gemara says, what are the 10 utterings that Hashem said? Vayomer. If you count in Parshas Bereshis, it says 9 times the word Vayomer. The Bereshis. Frag the Gemara, Hanitisha Hava. Okay, but there are only 9 times that Hashem said Vayomer, and you just said that there were 10 times. So that's the Gemara. The word Bereshis, Nami Mamahi. The word Bereshis is counted as one of the utterings of Hashem. Diksiv B'Dvar Hashem. With the words of Hashem, Shemayim Nasu, the heavens were created. V'ruach Piv, and the breath of God's mouth, Kol Tzavam, all the legions. So we see that Bereshis is considered as one utterance, and then 9 times it says the word Vayomer. So that's why we say Asar Mamores. There are 10 utterances that Hashem used to create the universe. Amar Rava said, since you have 10 people, right, 10 psukim, and you have 3 people, so one of them is going to get obviously 4 psukim, right? Because 4, 3, and 3. So who should get those 4 psukim? So Rava is going to posit that, you never know. Each one has a reason. Rishon Shakara Dalad Mishubach. If the first person that's called up the Torah was reading the 4 psukim, he's praiseworthy. Sheni Shakara Dalad. The second one, Mishubach, I see that it's praiseworthy to call the middle one to read the 4 psukim. Shlishi Shakar Dal, but the last one also, I see that there's a benefit for him reading the 4 psukim, Mishubach. So when they're deciding how to break up the aliyahs, Rav is saying, I see to give it to the first person. Maybe I see you could give it to the second person. Maybe you could give the 4 psukim to the third person. Well, how do you know? Rishon Shakar Dal and Mishubach. How do you know the first one that reads the 4 psukim is praiseworthy? That now we learned in the Mishnah, B'shalish kupish shalish soim shebehem tarmin es halishka. V'hoya kosaben aleph beis gimel leida ezemhem nitra rishon l'hakra mimen rishon shemitzvah berishon. This is a Mishnah in Shkolim that 3 times they would open up a big office in the Beis Hamikdash which has the donations of the people that gave machzas a shekel, and they would take some of the coins that were in that room and put it into jugs, kupais. Little jugs that had Aleph, Beis, Gimel that were labeled 1, 2, 3 to know which one was taken out from the Lishka first, and they used up number 1 for the first one, and then when they finished that jug, they started buying the carbonas from the second jug and then from the third jug. So, but they needed to know Aleph Beis Gimel because the Mishnah says mitzvah barishon, so mitzvah to know which one was the first. So we see that there is an importance given to the first one. Therefore, it's praiseworthy if you give the 4 psukim to the first one. But I find sometimes that the middle person, he's more the most important. Why? The Tanya we learned in the Brayse, when they would light the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, they pointed all the fire, the lamps, to the direction of the fire, pointed towards the middle one, towards the middle lamp, the Ner Maravi, it's called, and the Ner Maravi was facing towards the Shechina, because basically, according to this view, the menorah stood from east to west, and the middle from north to south, pardon me, but the middle one was bent towards the west, towards the sanctuary where the Aron was. So, but we see that everything was facing towards the middle. So we find in teaching that the middle is the most important. Always the last is the best, because we go up we go up and we don't go down. Papa, therefore, the last one, we want to give the honor of having 4 psukim to the last one. It says the Gemara, Papa Papa was a guest at the shul of Abi Goiver. Probably he donated it. And Vikara Rishon Abba, and they called up the first one to read the first person that got the Aliyah. He read the 4 psukim. Papa, Papa said, that's a good idea. So we see credence to giving the first. If you have a parsha of only 10 psukim, you're calling up 3 people, we see a basis to give it to the first person. One more Gemara, ein poichsem mesifim. Tana apsech mavarach lefaneha, amachoisim barach lachrea. Vo'idana. And nowadays, when we call people up to an aliyah, the kulim mavarach lefaneha lachrea. Every person who gets an aliyah makes a bracha prior and makes a bracha afterwards. Why? Why the Rabbanan change it that every person who gets an aliyah has to make 2 brachas, one before, one after. People who walked in, let's say you called up 3 people to the Torah, and somebody walks in to the shul after the kohen was called up, and the Levi is called up, and if he's not going to make a bracha prior to the reading of the Torah, people are going to say there is no bracha to reading the Torah first. And then the opposite case, if someone was there for the kohen and then walked out by the Levi, and the Levi is not going to make an after bracha, he's going to think to himself, he's a yotzin, he's going to think to himself that there is no after bracha. There's only a bracha prior to reading the Torah. There is no bracha after you read the Torah. So again, the reason why, it's funny, but the reason why that they required everybody who gets an aliyah to make a bracha beforehand and afterwards, because people would walk out or come late for Kriyas Torah, and they would get the wrong idea. Either they'll get the idea that you don't make a bracha prior to reading the Torah, or you don't make a bracha after you read the Torah. So for those people, they shouldn't walk away with the wrong information. They made a requirement that everybody should make a bracha prior to reading the Torah and after. Okay.
Shkayach, I guess you're leaving off with the punchline for tomorrow's laning, right?
Right, right.
Right.
It's